This is Ken Williams of Unfold the Soul. Welcome you to the Status Grow podcast. Let me tell you, this is going to be real talk focused on disrupting the status quo, baby. So, are you ready? Get set, and let's grow with your hosts, Paul O'Neill and Corey Radish.
Hey, thank you, Ken, for that great intro. This is the Status Grow podcast, episode 1.1. There was so much to unpack with Dr. Basil Marin that we took our initial episode and we cut it into two parts. This episode will be the second half of our conversation with the great Dr. Basil Marin.
So, as I told my defense team for my dissertation, if we were truly doing education right, Corey and Paul, I should not be a unicorn in being Dr. Marin now as a male of color, right? When we talk about 2% of people who hold terminal degrees, black males, they don't even have a statistic. It's so minuscule that it almost doesn't even matter. It's crazy. I've tried to look it up. It's like 0.0007, right? So how do we change that? And something you said earlier, Corey, is we were talking about the, I believe the news and talking about people have role models. How much of our students see black males of color? Even in education, we're 2% of a teaching force. So we talk about role models. It's very imperative. It's very important that students be able to see that, be able to have some of that culture responsive teaching and pedagogy, and I would say be exposed to it. You know, I also will say this, gentlemen, that I go to school sometimes where it might be an all-white staff and maybe all the students are white, and that's fine. But then that same school will say, well, we don't have an equity issue here. We're good. You can pass us by. No, that's exactly where the equity conversation needs to happen, because those kids who are also being tracked in this well-to-do school, there's a blue ribbon and all the great things, those are going to be the kids now who go into society. And as you said, Corey, if you weren't trained or don't know, you bring those same mindsets and skills and bias to the workforce. You're now a governor. You're now, a pediatrician, all these different jobs, right? Set up for success. And how you treat people matters. How you give opportunities matter, right? And so that's exactly where the equity conversation needs to have, because it might even be some people who are in that school that become educators. And if they aren't educated on how the system really works, they're going to continue to perpetuate it. Right. So it starts by having real conversations, people being understanding that it is a difficult conversation, and we run from those difficult conversations. Right. I liken, someone said to me once that reading White Fragility was like eating glass. Yeah, it's a hard book to read. It's a hard book to digest. Right. But there's so many people who have read the book, and I'll be honest with you, gentlemen, you can't just read the book and that's it. You have to take steps, as we said on Corey and Paul, about now that I know this is where I'm at, what am I going to do to change some things, right? How am I going to change my four walls of my classroom when I get back, and just create more opportunities, or push kids and say, hey, have you ever thought about doing this class? It would really benefit you. You talked about you wanted to be, astronaut. Well, I see that you're not in some of the higher level science classes, Jamal. What about looking at that class? I'll speak to a teacher for you to see if we can get you in there. Easy connection. Right? Instead of taking away the power, we're giving power and saying, hey, there's another level of access I could try to create for you. That's what we have to do. That's what we have to do with educators. We have to grow capacity and be able to give kids what they need, because let's be clear, the system's not made for that, right? And a lot of the families at home don't have the wherewithal. A lot of kids, my last story I will share is, this past year, I had a Hispanic male student who was a senior, and parents came from Guatemala. He was the first student in his class or his family to ever potentially graduate from high school. And so when I got him, let me also say this kid's 20 years old in high school. This kid could legally in 5 months go to the liquor store and buy a bottle. Okay. So this is an older kid for high school. Started working with him. The motivation was kind of semi there, but just kind of like, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I was trying to push him to really make this happen. We got to the end of the semester. He didn't really do everything he needed to do. His teacher was like, I'm not going to just give him the grade, which I get you. So he just didn't, he failed. So the kid comes to me. He's like, Dr. Marin. He's like, thank you for everything. I'm good. He's like, I'm just going to go ahead and withdraw from school. And again, you're 20, so he could sign it himself. Right. I'm like, dude, you're 2 classes away, right, from having this thing that is a passport to anything you want to do. Like any job you want to go to is going to ask you for a high school diploma or equivalent, any job at the minimum, right? And I told him, you're already Hispanic male. The world's already looking at you sideways anyway. So don't give them ammunition to be against you even more, right? So he's like, yeah, but I said, dude, okay, listen, we have summer school. I want you to enroll in these schools in summer, these 2 classes of summer school. We'll get you through. He's like, nah, Dr. Brown, I'm just done. I said, dude, I need you to do this. I really need, like, you might not see the full benefit now, but it's going to change your life, right? And one thing he said to me, Corey and Paul, that really still to this day shakes me to my core is he said, all right, Dr. Brown, I'll do it for you. Sometimes a kid's belief is going to be the belief that you believe in them before they can even see it themselves, right? And is he really doing it for me? Nah, it's not going to affect me anymore. It's not going to change my paycheck. It's not going to, right? But in that moment, I said, cool. I said, do it for me. We'll get you through. And he took those 2 classes and he passed, right? And it was just an extra umph. And summer school is a little bit more lax. Teachers have more time. It's a little different environment. So it was this past summer. So, we're obviously in COVID. So kids were coming up to the school to get their diplomas. And the guidance counselor gave me the opportunity to give it to him because I had been working with him so closely. I mean, I was texting this guy, calling him, and he came in the door. I had my mask on and my gloves on, and I handed it to him. He just sat there and he just looked at it. All right. You've been about it for so long. He just looked at it and he said, and like, I don't know if y'all seen Gloria, but the Denzel tear just kind of rolled. Like, there's no words to capture that moment, right? And he's like, Dr. Marin, he's like, thank you. Thank you for believing in me and for helping me get this. He said, without you, I couldn't get this. And I know, COVID, my post-search kids, but I give him a hug, y'all. I was like, I'm taking that risk because he needed that. And I said, and I'm going to give him a shout out. So, Wilfredo, you're now changing your life. Not only your life changed, but your kids are now going to have a new standard of this is what education means. That's the purpose of education, you all. Doing above and beyond contractual terms, giving kids what they need, because his whole life now is going to change, right? And then being able to give back and say, this is what this education is. It is a stepping stool to the next place. And so we talk about equity. We have to do more of that. How many kids, Corey and Paul, do we allow this to fall through the cracks because, well, he didn't do it? It would have been easy for me to say, teacher to say, well, he didn't do what he needed to do. And we both would have been justified by that. The superintendent could have came into school the next day and I would have had all the data for you on why he didn't pass and why he's like part of the dropout rate, right? But if y'all know my story, that's not how I rock. And if that was the case for me, I wouldn't be where I'm at. Right. So that's the type of things I think educators have to know. But it all comes back to another word I think is very essential to education. That's relationship. Right. We have to get back to the basics of relationships and giving kids what they need. And I know another part of our notes was talking about compassion over compliance. And I kind of just want to get into that a little bit. That is something that the state superintendent said here in Georgia, and I've run with it because that is so true, especially during COVID. Right. The inequities, Corey and Paul, that we've seen right now during COVID, let's be clear, they're nothing new. And that's what trips me out about people right now. They're like, oh my God, technology and so-and-so doesn't have a Chromebook and you don't have a hotspot. Y'all, this has been for decades, this has been going on, right? So why are we acting like this is brand new right now? It's baffling to me. But it has exacerbated the inequities that have already been there. So going back to the theme of our conversation, this is the perfect time for state superintendents, I'll say even the Department of Education, federal level. We got new people in charge now. This is a perfect time to re-examine policies, re-examine things that are going to put things in place to be intentional and how we're going to make sure that all kids have what they need. I'm tired, gentlemen, of seeing these immaculate equity plans at the state level, local level, federal level that are 18, 45-page documents about equity that are sitting on people's shelves. How do we operationalize equity? Equity takes action. Equity is not, you have to be intentional. Equity doesn't just happen, right? Because we talked about equity, dropped the word 5 times in the PD, now we're equitable. That's not how it works. So how are we going to make it, how do we operationalize it so our kids have what they need in the school day and they have a pathway for access and a pathway for what they need? That's the meaning of equity, right? And once teachers understand that, administrators understand that, I would say people at the federal, state level understand that, then as we start to be intentional about what we're doing, we're all on the same page and we continue to work towards that. I know that was a lot, but I get fired up about that because people, they want to ask me all the time, how do you operationalize it? By taking action, by taking a stand, by making sure books in your classroom look like our kids, right? Like, let's be Corey, I love to talk about Abe Lincoln, but once we move past that, I need to see a book that I resonate with, right? Like in English classes, we read all these books and all this literature, and I'm not saying it's bad. So for anyone listening, your ELA teacher, please do not crucify me. But you can't just keep listening to books and reading books about dead white men. That's not attracting to all of our kids. And then you wonder why they barely escape your class, or they're failing, or you're skipping your class. It's not engaging them, right? And so I'm not saying every book needs to be about a student of color, but you need to make sure that you're reaching everyone in your class. Posters in the school have to have Olympians other than just white people. Especially when you're living you're leading a school that's multicultural, there has to be other faces, because kids, going back to the word access and belief, kids start to believe in things when they can see it, right? When you can see it, okay, that's a possibility. And little things here and there start to add up to say, okay, I'm gonna keep working hard. I'm gonna keep working at this thing because I can see it being a possibility for me, even though I might not have seen it before. It's a possibility. If I can't see it, I'm not going to work towards it. It's as simple as that.
It's ironic. It's ironic after all of that you end with it's as simple as that. You know, because there's so much there. There's so much. You know, I have like 3 deep points, and I'm sure Corey probably has at least 3 of his own, you know, to touch base on. But you know, the first thing I want to talk about is you talked about the pictures of the Olympians, and they can't just be white. You know, I call that a Wheaties checkbox. You know what I mean? Like, we did it. We went there, like we put a picture of someone of color or someone that looks different than us up there. We're good to go, you know, but we really need to take a walk around our buildings and listen and look and feel what our buildings feel like, you know, not only for ourselves, but for others. And then we've got to have those conversations with others and say, you know, how does the building look and sound and feel for you? You know, do you feel relevant here? Do you feel welcome here? Do you feel safe here? You know, and those answers may vary, you know, maybe some yeses, some nos, maybe all nos, maybe it's all yeses, but we've got to have that real talk conversation. I'm not going to call it honest talk, because I think sometimes real and honest can get a little muddy, you know, and they're not interchangeable. You know what I mean? So, and that real conversation develops through relationships. You know, I had some conversation about the stuff that happened at the Capitol last week, and with a very, very dear friend of mine. Over 25 years we've been friends, and that conversation was animated. It was heated at times, and it wasn't so much that we completely disagreed, but we definitely disagreed on some things. But because of that conversation, we were able to have real talk. You know, we were able to extend our thinking, and maybe where we came into the conversation wasn't where we left. You know, but I want to go back to one thing and then give Corey an opportunity, because I'm sure he has a bunch of things to pull apart as well. But yeah, I'm going to call this, it's going to be a regular feature of our show. Okay. It's called the Status Grow Moment. Okay. And this Status Grow Moment is sponsored by Dr. Basil Marin. So Basil says, belief that you believe in them before they see it themselves. Folks, let that sit in for a second. That's powerful. You know, and belief is a competitive advantage. Yeah. When you have someone that believes in you, and you can feel that unconditional support, no matter when you're doing well or you're not doing well, whether you've just made a terrible mistake or you've made a minor mistake, or whether you're asking too many questions and you're being annoying to somebody, you know, because they don't have necessarily the time or the ability to unpack something as deep as we're unpacking today. When you feel that, you know, if you close your eyes and you think about somebody in your life that believed in you unconditionally, no matter what, think about how that feels, folks. Think about how that felt. Think about what that enabled you to do. You were able to not only meet your expectations, but to far exceed them, to exceed them beyond your wildest dreams, because that belief was there. And I got to tell you, the friend, I'm not going to name him because I didn't ask his permission, but he's a person in my life that's believed in me unconditionally. And I've been able to see my potential and to be able to see what my purpose is and create a greater vision, you know, because of his belief in me.
Paul, really quickly, I promise you, Corey, it'll be very quick. I promise you. But I just want to share something just now. Both of you all know my story. I'm not going to go too much into it, because you know it makes me emotional every time, but I'm not going to do it today. But what I will say is Miss Kathy Sankson, my 9th grade teacher, was someone who did that for me. Both of y'all know my story. That was 18 years ago, right? 18 years ago. And I just want to give your viewers something really quick. that you see, she gave me a Christmas ornament, and Dr. Basil Marin ODU, and this is 18 years of belief. Let that sink in. 18 years of belief where she said, I believed in you, and now it's all you. The other way. Basil Marin, and it says PhD. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
2 gifts she gave me during the Christmas season, but that's 18 years of fruition of belief that came to fruition, and that's powerful, right? For students, even for both of you, like I said, like I know Corey, you work for Believe the State, and again, Paul, you're an administrator, but someone believed in you, I believe, to even say to go from teaching to go to an administrator, tapped you on the shoulder, had a one-on-one conversation, said, hey, I think you can have a greater impact. Same thing's happened to me. I've had plenty of mentors, but that belief doesn't just stop when you graduate high school. Right? I just want to be clear. There are other different people who believe in you and say things and speak into your life that carry you along the journey. So thank you for mentioning that. But the belief part is huge, brother. It doesn't have an age limit. When you believe in somebody, you have that true, genuine belief and say, let's do this together. It's powerful.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, and it's definitely one of the things that I wrote down, Paul. And you're right; it has no age limit, and I've been in places where it didn't work out, but the belief I had in what I was doing, and keeping my faith. I had people like Paul. I had some other people, that I could lean on, that said, "Hey, listen, you're doing the right work, so, you'll find that spot and whatever that may be." And I used to say to kids, you know what, it's okay right now. I'm going to believe in you more than you believe in yourself, but it's not always going to be okay. You're going to have to, and you see that evolution when you're carrying the belief first for them, and it is a really, really powerful tool. And when I have kids who find me on Facebook and say, "Hey, coach," when I was teaching them, the impact you made on me in 4th grade health class, it reminds us of the why of our work, which is what I'm really passionate about and what I present. I just did something the other day with a school because of the frustrations, right? Reconnecting with that why. So, that is some powerful stuff, and I know I could speak for Paul, and hopefully when this launches, Wilfredo will listen. And Wilfredo, congratulations, my man. Make sure that you continue to rise, and you take that belief from Dr. Marin and you turn it into your own self-belief, and we want to hear you doing great things. The other portion that I just want to touch on quickly was, you were talking about the schools and curriculum, and can't just read a book and, okay, I read a book and you know what? I denounce racism. It's over. No, there's actual hard work that goes into it, and the hard work is holding people accountable, right? I've said this a million times that, as a building leader, which both of you guys are, you want to be a leader 99.9% of the time, and unfortunately there's times that you have to be a boss. And you have to hold people accountable, and if there are people who their biases are evident and we're not saying anything, that also defines the culture in some place. And a great activity that Ken Williams and Tom Herrick, they have a book called Starting a Movement, like changing a culture. I should know it because I was actually in it on page 157, but I mean, okay, it carries over to 158. But anyway, in the book they talk about creating collective commitments, right? Not belief statements, not, oh, we here at school XYZ, we believe in this. These are actual behaviors to commit to for the work, whatever you want to design it around. You want to create a collective commitment for your baseball team, and what is it going to take to win the division? Okay. But creating collective commitments around equity and sitting in the room, putting adults in groups about what does equity work, what does that behavior look like, sound like. And the hard part of that is sometimes it's just silent. Some people just don't know. And it's like we had a guest on our Sunday show who wrote a book, John Cranapple and Dr. Floyd, that talk about some people are equity passionate and some people are equity competent. And how do we take those equity passionate people, because they want to do what's right, it's in their heart, but they just don't know how to do it, and make them equity competent. So that's where I would leave that. And Basil, if you can, you going forward, if you can, you kind of talked about having this compassion with the belief over the compliance and all that kind of stuff, but maybe touch a little bit on in the last couple minutes. I know both Paul and I were moved. You were on Sheldon Aiken's Leading Equity 3-day marathon of webinars, which were incredible. So shout out to Dr. Aikens. But your presentation and the ABCs was really powerful. So could you give us a little bit about the ABCs?
Absolutely. And I want to give a shout out to my equity brother. I call him JT Taylor. You can find him also on Twitter at Purpose Pusher. But we spoke about the ABCs of equity implementation. And it goes back to, I love, Corey, what you just said about being equity passionate. And I think the second one was being equity competent, maybe, if I said it right. But when you're talking about those two different things, there are ABCs. So the competent people are people who put it into action. And so a word I've kind of talked about through all of the podcast was access, right? And in the presentation we talked about, and I've already kind of alluded to a little bit, just the higher levels of curriculum and higher levels of high quality education in schools. And again, how many students of color have limited access to those classes. We showed a graph of just IB, AB education, and how just, again, the literature and the data speaks to minority students, specifically minority males, have limited access, or not even are involved in AP classes or IB classes, and how that really impacts their educational experience. And again, those things also build up to then when you're looking at high school graduation or going beyond, that then causes this kind of rift where it's hard to continue those educational paths, right? So what are we doing as schools to increase that? And again, that's across the nation. That's in places that are, again, has a high, I would say, urban population, to places who don't. But at the same time, even when we're going to highly populated places, if anything, that should be the places where we see a difference, right? And we don't. So that was huge. So access is everything. The second thing we spoke about is belief, and I spoke about that several times today. We really have to stop lowering expectations and standards for students. Specifically, I'll speak about 3 different groups, but I'll say ESOL students. We make excuses, students with disabilities, and then at-risk students. And again, it can be at-risk academically, behaviorally. There are a lot of different things that can make a student at risk, right? And I even struggle with that word, because that is another label. A lot of times for students with socioeconomic disadvantaged students, they get that same label. They can be double coded, right? But one thing I've really learned about the work of working with students who are from hardships is really the work of ACEs, right? I don't know if you all have heard of that work. And really something that I've been thinking about since we've been in COVID is usually it stands for adverse childhood experiences, right? And so I've looked at it during COVID at adverse COVID experiences, right? What have been some of the COVID experiences that students have experienced that have prevented them from getting into the educational space and being successful? I'm at a school right now where we have 1,800 kids, and that's 30% African American, 30% Caucasian, 30% Hispanic. And for our Hispanic community, we have so many homes that are multi-generational, right? That either people lost their homes that had to come together, or they were already that way at the beginning. But then you have it where even for schools providing a hotspot, you have 7 kids trying to use one hotspot and maybe a couple Chromebooks, right? That's a disadvantage. We have other kids in the community who are living in hotels. Right, you have one room with several people in there, and it's loud. We have little kids trying to be engaged in school, and the older kid in high school is in and out of the place because they got to get a job, because they're trying to provide. Like it's so much going on, and then that's why I've been so intentional about the compassion over compliance, because teachers don't really understand everything that's going on, right, in these kids' lives, and how we're so, in education, we're taught, or our expectation is, if we gave a deadline of 4:00 and it's not turned in by 4:00, you're late, So when you turn in at midnight, I have to give you points off. Right. And then you have teachers that say, well, what about accountability and what are we teaching the kids? And I get all of that. Right. I get all of that. Yes. But we're in a global pandemic, y'all. Like, people are dying. There's so much going on that kids are just struggling. Mental health, I mean, we've seen that at an all-time high for both students and teachers. I mean, people are really struggling. So how do we make sure that we believe in kids? And again, it goes back to the word I used earlier, relationship. If you don't have a relationship with a kid, they're not going to tell you what they're going through. That's for pride reasons. That's for personal privacy reasons. I don't want you to know my business. There's a lot of different things going on. But if you have a simple relationship with a student, they might share with you, "Hey, Miss So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, Dr. So, I'm just really struggling with this. And if we're given a little, I don't have a 504, I don't have extended time, but if I was given a little extra time, I could get it to you by here." Right. And then all other assignments moving forward, I will make sure try to get to you on time, or at least communicate with you that I'm going to be late. Right. That's all comes back to this relationship piece and just knowing your kids. Right. So that belief piece is so critical, so huge. And kids more than ever right now need belief in them. Right, because they just feel like just the human. And y'all know me, I love people, love giving hugs, like, and I'm personable, and that has really been a challenge for me as an administrator, to be an administrator from my kitchen table. It's not the same, right? It's only so much things I can do through a Google Voice number or through an email, as just the human connection piece is not there, right? And there's so many kids who get on Zoom and don't want to put on their camera, right? So that also is hard for teachers to connect, and I get that. So the belief part is very huge. And the last part, the C, is just culturally responsive teaching, right? And that comes back to the curriculum, goes back to how are you allowing culture to have a place of value within your school, right? Student learning and achievement, right? So teachers have to be able to communicate high expectations for all students, right? And knowing that students can grow. Right, being able to make sure that you have an affirmation of students of cultural competence and of differences, right? So being able to allow kids to share their culture in class, being able to have components where kids can maybe be leaders of a certain component in the class, or lead discussions, right? Or be able to give their input on what's going on in the class. And then secondly, being able to have that critical consciousness of what's going on with your students. As you said, Paul, earlier in the show, kids watch what happened in the Capitol building. We watched it live, just like we watched George Floyd live. A lot of different things that we can just see. And how did that impact students? Right. And are we giving them a place where they can have a safe place and we can say, yes, I'm a math teacher, but let's unpack what happened the other day. Right. We have to let them grapple with what's going on so they can be able to cope with, okay, well, I'm a student of color, and what I saw was unacceptable, right? But nothing happened. But I've seen so much other things going on where people are, they say somebody stole something from 7-Eleven and they got gunned down. These people were in the Capitol building. Right. So let kids grapple with that and be able to ask honest questions. And for a teacher, that is going to be a vulnerable place, because you might not have the answers, right? Like, no one really has the answer, but you can facilitate and help guide that conversation and make sure it's appropriate for school and whatnot. But just having that space, kids will remember that. They will remember, man, Miss So-and-so allowed us to have a genuine, honest conversation today. And I appreciate that. Even though it's a math class, a social studies class, they remember that. And those moments, you all ties back to relationship and pays dividends in the long run. Right. And so that's what we need right now. Education is being able to have those ABCs of, and again, we could go for A through Z, right? But that was just the first part about what are some things you can do right now. Because I also believe, Corey and Paul, and I think people are guilty of this too, is they have a long laundry list of equity that they want to implement, right? So there'll be 25 things they want to do. You're not going to do all those with fidelity. You're just not. So pick 2 or 3 big rocks that you want to tackle and do those well. See the results, get the motivation, have a data behind it so you can bring back a plan to the staff and show the growth of how we're doing it. And then you can continue to implement or build upon like Legos down the road, right? But one of the last things, if you allow me to have another status growth, I think we could call them moments, Paul, is that we have to do the hard work before we do the hard work. That's it. And that comes back to the relationship. That comes back to knowing our students, knowing our teachers, being able to allow people to see the why, as Corey said, behind what we do. Share your own personal story as an administrator. Share your story as a teacher with the kids. Let them see you for being human. Take you off of a pedestal and saying, man, they get it. And then you're able to tap into the hard work of moving kids 2 or 3 grade levels, or helping them pass the SOLs or the EOC, and of course assessment. They'll do that work for you because you tapped into them as a person. And that hard work also goes back to everything we talked about: access, belief, culture responsive. Those things all touch to the heart. Right. And we're in the business of people. Right. And I'll leave without saying this. There are a lot of educators, Corey and Paul, in education who don't even like kids. But let's keep it 100. But I've been in the game 20 some years. I need my little pension. I ain't going nowhere. And I'm not about to switch careers, so I'm just going to hang it through. But there could be some of your most negative Nancy's in the building. They're disruptors in a way to continue systemic oppression. And as you said, Corey, as a leader, you have to have those courageous conversations and say, this is not happening here. I need to do what's best for all kids. It's going to take time, but I need you to be on board what we're doing here. And we all need to be, as you said, a collective commitment to be able to have what we need at this school or this division or this state to be able to move forward in the right direction. So that is so incredibly humbling to be here. But again, the biggest thing for me and my mission and my philosophy is doing the hard work before you do the hard work, because kids deserve that.
Basil, I got to say, I really think, especially that last part, you booked yourself another episode. So we've got to come back with you somewhere down the road to unpack that. I had something I wanted to share, but I'm going to hold on to it for the next time because there's just so much to process here. And Corey and I even talked about the potential of releasing this episode in 2 parts, because, to sit and listen to this for, nearly an hour, there's a lot to unpack, where it might be more powerful and more digestible to take it in smaller doses. So Corey, we'll talk about that when we're off the air for sure. And I'm going to let Corey wrap it up in a second, but Basil, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm so proud of the work that you do. I'm proud of the person that you are, and I'm proud of the person that you inspire others to be. And thank you so much for honoring us with your presence. You easily could have said no. A lot of pressure would be in the first ever, guest on the Status Quo podcast. And you, my friend, did not disappoint.
Wow.
That is for sure. And before I thank him, I got to thank my wife and daughters who are upstairs with the dogs, so that in our first ever podcast, we didn't have barking. Maybe as we get known, barking will be a little acceptable. I didn't want it in the first one. Yeah, I mean, so many powerful things, and there's so many little sound bites in there, but being real, right? Being able to have that conversation, being comfortable enough in your own skin to ask questions, regardless of if me as a white man and you as a black man. Just real quick, I remember I was in an airport or somewhere, and we all had to wait. This was pre-COVID, and there was a gentleman. He had an accent I'd never heard before. So I went up to him and I said, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you where you're from?" Oh, he's like, "Oh, no. And we started having a great conversation. I was asking him about his country. My kids were like, "Oh my God, you just went up to somebody and asked them where they're from?" Yeah, because I wanted to learn,
Right.
And we can't put the brakes on that. Like, we have to really push forth. But yeah, I mean, Paul and I will talk about maybe splitting this up because of the power of your influence, Basil. I mean, it's been a privilege for me to be in the same box with you. Hopefully, as COVID hopefully gets out of here soon, we can connect in real time, and I'm a hugger too, bro. So
Absolutely.
I got no problem. And we want to thank everybody who's tuned in today and listened to the first ever Status Quo podcast, which may be the first 2 ever Status Quo podcasts. And we just want to say out there, make sure that you do keep it real, keep working hard at it. Dismantle that status quo and make sure you keep that mindset of status quo. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. The last thing I'll say to your viewers, Corey and Paul, is this: that in the work of equity, it's okay to disagree, and that's a big part of the work. but you got to be aligned. All right. So you don't have to agree, but you got to be aligned to move that work forward and continue to do the hard work so you can do the hard work.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody.
Wow. Thanks to Dr. Basil Marin for giving us lots to think about. We hope you enjoyed episode 1.1 of the Status Grow podcast. We thank all of our listeners and viewers for the feedback provided. We're glad that you enjoyed our show. Be on the lookout for episode 2 coming soon. And until then, keep growing.